This seat is obviously meant for me.
I booked this a week ago. This is my seat.
Do you even know who I am?
What matters here is the boarding pass. It has my name. Maybe you'd be more comfortable in business class.
Surai.
I'm perfectly comfortable right here.
The air grew heavy, every breath charged with silence, every gaze demanding an answer to a single haunting question. When the rules are used as weapons, who will stand for justice? And this was only the beginning. The next moment would prove even more explosive. Do you agree with the way she stood her ground? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow for more. The first-class cabin glowed with a late autumn warmth that softened metal edges and hushed the shuffle of coats. Danielle Brooks stepped into the aisle with a measured breath that steadied more than her posture. The week ahead mattered, a contract that could shape her company's next few years. Meetings layered across Los Angeles like careful stitches, and the rare promise she had made to herself to fly, for once, without apologizing for needing quiet. A flight attendant at the galley greeted her with a practiced smile and a gentle welcome aboard, before offering sparkling water. Danielle accepted with a nod and a soft aware of the faint cinnamon note riding the cabin air, the seasonal signature that airports and hotels adopted in the days leading to Thanksgiving week. She found her place near the front and let the words on her boarding pass confirm what she already knew. Seat 1A. The chair welcomed her like a well-made glove with broad shoulder space, a blanket folded with hotel precision, and a small card at the console, reminding passengers about the meal service, the beverages, and the airline's values. She placed a leather tote under the ottoman and slid a slim notebook onto the side shelf. The pages inside carried hand-drawn grids and tidy lines, fragments of thought ready to be assembled when the world quieted. For a moment, she just watched the window, a sheet of glass between her and the drizzle that had teased the tarmac all afternoon. The drops traveled as if pulled by a silent compass, finding edges and seams before letting go. Calm did not visit her life often. She chose to let it linger. In the slow rhythm of boarding, greetings threaded the aisle, couples whispering about hotel check-ins, a retiree offering a polite after you to a stranger, attendants lifting overhead bins with efficient grace. A second attendant paused by Danielle's row and asked if she preferred still or sparkling water, coffee or tea. Danielle requested still water and, almost by habit, reached for a tip she would have offered at a lounge or cafe. She stopped herself with a small smile. This was not the place for that gesture. Though gratitude worked fine in any cabin. I appreciate it, she said, and the thank you landed with a quiet weight of sincerity. Her phone was already set to airplane mode. She powered down the laptop and left only the notebook open, pen clipped to the top page. She wrote a single line, one sentence that reminded her why she had chosen to build slowly rather than loudly. Success had taught her to hold herself still when the moment tried to rush her. Outside, a luggage cart hummed away from the belly of the plane. The sound receded until all she could hear was a barely there whir of conditioned air and a murmur from the jet bridge. She let herself notice the ritual of departure, the coat slipped into garment bags, the way a gentleman folded his newspaper as if he were apologizing to the page, the muted glow of privacy lights that first-class cabins used to suggest comfort without needing to say the word. These small markers soothed her. They also reminded her of rooms where calm had been tested, boardrooms where a receptionist had asked twice if she was in the right place, conferences where a sponsor badge did not persuade a security guard as quickly as someone else's smile did. Those memories did not intrude. They drifted like older weather. Part of the long season a person carries when she has worked her way forward without shortcuts. The cabin filled slowly, the way a stage fills with actors who understand their entrances but not yet the play. An attendant placed a warm towel on a small dish beside her and asked if she preferred to delay meal service to rest. Danielle thanked her and chose to wait until after takeoff. The attendant's reply, "Of course, Miss Brooks," landed with the welcome neutrality of a name pronounced correctly and without surprise. A pair of travelers passed her, row one juggling a briefcase and a travel pillow, the other carrying a paper cup that smelled like almonds and vanilla. Someone mentioned a relative driving up from Savannah for Thanksgiving dinner, and the long stretch of interstate that connected families across counties and pastures. Danielle felt the familiar ache that accompanies distance and duty, the recognition that even when work pulls hard, a person still measures time by family and food and the small liturgies of a holiday table. She adjusted the silk scarf at her neck, more habit than vanity, and considered closing her eyes. Instead, she studied the seat controls and programmed a modest recline, just enough to encourage rest without courting sleep. The safety card slid obediently from the pocket, all icons and arrows and confident colors. She read it as she always did. Ritual breeds ease. Ease gives the mind permission to post a guard at the threshold and keep noise outside. An attendant returned with water and a slice of lemon that sent a bright scent across the air. If you need anything, just press the call button, she said. The sentence spoken the way grace is offered at a table. Not demanded, simply present. Danielle sipped and let the cool taste settle her tongue. She wrote a second sentence in the notebook, a line about staying concise in tomorrow's presentation, about beginning with outcomes rather than process. The pen moved in neat strokes and then rested on the coil binding. Somewhere behind her, laughter pinpricked the hush. The kind of nervous humor that spreads across the cabin when departure inches near and people pretend they are not keeping score against the clock. A man in the next row asked an attendant if the forecast in Los Angeles promised clear skies. Clear, the attendant said, with the chill of autumn tucked into the evening. It sounded like a prose poem, and Danielle let herself enjoy the line as if it had been arranged just for her. She thought of the meeting that awaited her partners who respected results, who valued steady leadership over theatrics. That word made sense. Evidence presented, terms negotiated, signatures collected like a closing hymn. Flying, by contrast, resembled a public trust exercise. Every stranger's patience braided together in a narrow tube held aloft by physics and faith. Courtesy kept the braids from fraying. She had learned to thread courtesy through every hour she could control. The jet bridge groaned as it shifted. The movement sent a light tremor along the cabin floor, the faintest reminder that the aircraft was still embraced by the terminal. Danielle straightened the page corner and placed the pen exactly parallel to the notebook's edge. Order has a way of calming the stacked files in one's head. She let her gaze drift over the cabin once more, noting the way the overhead bin doors sat flush like firm-lipped promises, and how the small theater of first class ran on tiny, precise cues. On the edge of hearing, the terminal outside mumbled announcements about zones and rows, about families with small children. The cadence of airports is bilingual in its own way, half instruction, half lullaby for grown travelers who need to be told when to line up and when to exhale. Danielle did not line up for much anymore, but she honored the choreography that made movement possible for everyone on board. She drew a deeper breath, a rehearsal for the nap she might allow herself once the seatbelt sign dimmed. The breath settled in, even and round. She lifted the glass for another sip, tasting lemon, a memory of summer at the edge of an autumn day. The world narrowed to the safe rectangle of her seat and the small fortress of armrests that held her safely in the pause between tasks. The aisle carried the scuff of another pair of shoes, the soft authority of high-end leather, the sort of stride that enters rooms already expecting agreement. Danielle kept her eyes on the gentle skid of rain against glass, trusting the crew and the ritual and the luck of a seat selected weeks earlier. The steps slowed, aligning with her row. She kept her pen. The steady air in her chest waited for release, a second breath that would tuck the moment fully into calm. Just as Danielle takes a deep breath, a sharp voice echoes from the aisle. "Excuse me, that's my seat." The aisle still held the echo of that sharp claim from a moment before, the kind that makes a quiet cabin feel suddenly smaller. The ring at the window traced patient lines, as if the weather outside refused to participate in the human urgency inside. Danielle Brooks looked up from her notebook, her breath even, her posture unchanged, carrying forward the unruffled calm she had worked to earn. The attendants kept their choreography smooth, polite greetings, a nod toward the overhead bins, a soft reminder about stowing larger items, yet a subtle pause rippled through their timing as a woman stopped at the front row. The handbag on her arm gleamed, its metal clasp catching the cabin light, and the scent of a bright, expensive perfume arrived half a beat before her voice did. She tipped her chin toward the window seat, as if directing a junior employee to stand aside. "Excuse me," she said, not so much an apology as a summons. "This seat is obviously meant for me." Danielle felt the words land and pass through her, as if her ribcage were built to let such things move on without lodging. She turned the boarding pass that lay on her armrest so the name and seat faced outward, and in a voice that carried courtesy like a steady lantern, she answered, "I booked this weeks ago, here's my boarding pass." For a heartbeat, the aisle seemed to hold its breath. Then an attendant stepped in with a measured smile. "Let me take a look," he said, badge glinting at his chest. He was tall, neatly pressed, the kind of steady presence that first-class cabins trade on. His name tag read Brian Carter. He scanned the pass, glanced at his tablet, and nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Seat 1A is assigned to Miss Brooks." The woman's mouth arranged itself into a smile that did not quite involve her eyes. She looked from the tablet to Danielle and then back again, as if repetition might adjust reality into a more suitable shape. There must be a glitch, she said lightly, performing reasonableness the way some people perform charity. I'm a platinum elite. I always sit in 1A on this route. Brian maintained the kind of politeness that can mean many things at once. I understand, Miss Miller, she supplied. Catherine Miller. Miss Miller? He corrected smoothly. I can double-check availability first, but 1A is correctly assigned. He offered the line like a neutral card placed on a table where others had already begun raising the stakes. Catherine shifted her weight, the handbag swinging with emotion as if it, too, had an opinion. Maybe there's flexibility, she said, and the cabin heard what politeness kept her from stating outright. There's a business class seat open a row back. Perhaps Miss Brooks would be more comfortable there. The suggestion did not bother to hide its premise. Danielle felt the old ache stir, the one taught by years of being asked to trade the earned for the offered, the rightful for the convenient. She did not let the ache write on her face. I appreciate your concern, she said, but I'll remain in my seat. A pair of travelers in the next row pretended to study a menu card that had only 2 drink options on it, the way people pretend to be occupied when the hush grows heavy. Brian's smile held, but a crease touched the air beside it. He tapped the tablet once more, slower now, as though the software might reveal a diplomatic solution if treated with sufficient gentleness. Catherine turned a fraction toward Danielle, the glitter on her earring doing the speaking her tone tried not to do. What I mean, she said, is that this is a simple way to prevent further delay for everyone. We all have places to be. Danielle's hand moved to the small glass of water, and she set it aside so that the next words would have no tremor to be blamed on condensation. Of course, she said. That is why I booked this seat weeks ago. A long time. The reply laid itself across the aisle, quiet as a folded blanket. Catherine's smile thinned. She looked at Brian again, and the appeal in her expression dragged his professional composure a half step toward her side. He gestured gently to Danielle. Miss Brooks, if you would not mind, I can move you to 2C just for today. Same cabin, very similar experience. 报得把的床的 Danielle held his gaze long enough for the request to register as what it was. Not a solution, but a transfer of weight from one set of shoulders to another. I'm comfortable here, she said. Thank you. Somewhere behind them, a passenger coughed. The kind of cough that means nothing to lungs and a great deal to a room. Outside, a service vehicle rolled past, its low engine note humming like a bass line under the rising treble of human friction. Brian cleared his throat softly, an attempt to smooth a wrinkle that would not lie flat. Catherine's voice trimmed itself down to an edge. Maybe you'd be more comfortable in business class. The sentence slid into the hush and tugged. Eyes lifted. The language was polite, but its cargo was not. Danielle's spine recognized the familiar weight of it, the assumption, the expectation, the invisible sorting that every polite society denies while practicing daily. She did not allow the thought to write any bitterness across her mouth. She let it pass like weather over water. Miss Miller, Brian said, stepping a careful inch back toward duty. Let me check with my supervisor about other first-class options for you. We will do our best. Catherine granted him a nod that suggested he had finally remembered his place. The nod glanced off Danielle as though she were part of the upholstery, useful but not essential. Danielle noticed the way the nod felt and filed it, not as anger, but as information. The years had taught her that information is a kind of armor when worn properly. An older couple across the aisle lowered their eyes in tandem, like a small flock deciding to remain on the wire. The woman placed a gentle hand over the man's wrist, a gesture that belonged to marriages that have counted seasons. The plane was not taxiing yet. Time stretched, thin and elastic between the desire to depart and the duty to do so, with everyone in the right seat. Brian stepped away, speaking softly into the small mic near his collar. Danielle breathed the way she had learned to breathe before she spoke to investors or to interns, a breath that reaches the back of the lungs and returns with patience. She ran a fingertip along the notebook's wire binding and let the wordless rhythm keep her company. Catherine stayed planted at the aisle, angled toward Danielle, the way one might stand over a claim staked on a map. You know, she said, lowering her voice in a friendly register that did not quite land, these things happen all the time. Loyalty matters on this route. It helps the airline keep its best customers happy. The line asked to be admired for how reasonable it looked in profile. Danielle studied it for what it was and chose not to admire. What matters here, she said, is the boarding pass and the assignment attached to it. Catherine's eyes flicked down, up, then down again. Her smile returned, smaller now, as if the muscles themselves understood the limits of their own performance. The perfume traced another bright loop through the air and dissipated. From the galley, a metal tray touched the counter with a soft chime. Life's ordinary sounds continued, as they always do. Even when discomfort makes a room feel misaligned, Brian reappeared with the same calm face but a new angle to his stance, one that made room for a supervisor approaching from the galley. Danielle did not yet look at the newcomer. She watched how Brian's shoulders adjusted, how his eyes tried to be two things at once: fair and accommodating, accurate and appeasing. She had seen those eyes in boardrooms too. He spoke in the same even tone as before. "Miss Miller, we are still confirming the best available seat for you. Miss Brooks' assignment in 1A stands." He placed a little extra weight on the last word. Not enough to bruise, but enough to keep gravity honest. The supervisor's footsteps paused a respectful distance away, and in that pause, Catherine measured the room again and seemed to find it stubbornly unchanged. The smile on her mouth returned to its post, but it now resembled a flag hanging on a windless afternoon. The cabin's hum resumed its regular pitch, as if the aircraft itself believed in the relief that comes when rules remind people where to stand. Danielle took that moment, brief, precise, sufficient to end the exchange in a way that neither scolded nor surrendered. She lifted her hands from the armrests and set them down again, palms open. The gesture contained nothing theatrical, only the shared language of closure that adults use when the conversation's purpose has been spent. Danielle folds her arms, her voice steady. "I'm perfectly comfortable right here." The air thickens as nearby passengers glance up. The sentence she had just spoken hung in the air like a hand gently closing a door, and the door did not quite latch. Eyes lifted from glossy magazines and phone screens, the slow commerce of pre-flight comforts coats folded, glasses refilled, pillows adjusted, lost a step and then another. Somewhere aft, an overhead bin clicked shut with the stubbornness of old furniture. Danielle Brooks kept her breathing level, the way she did before walking to a room where she knew someone would be surprised to learn she was the person in charge. The attendant named Brian floated on professionalism, but even professionalism has tides. He glanced toward the galley where a supervisor had begun her approach, the crisp lines of her navy jacket moving with the economy of someone who solved small fires before they learned the word blaze. She arrived with a soft apology already prepared in her eyes. "Good afternoon," she said, voice low enough to honor the privacy first class pretends to promise. "I'm Susan Hall. I understand there's a seating concern." Catherine Miller did not wait to be invited into the explanation. "Concern is generous," she said. "It's a mistake. I am a platinum elite on this route. The system knows that. I sit in 1A. She placed a hand on the headrest as if she were steadying something fragile, and the gesture landed as a claim. Susan listened with the trained calm of airline leadership, the kind used to coax turbulence back into smooth air. "Thank you for letting us know, Miss Miller," she said, turning a measured degree toward Danielle. "Miss Brooks, I do see your boarding pass confirms 1A. To help us push back on time, would you be willing to move to 2C today? We would make sure you have everything you need." There it was again, the offer wrapped in the ribbon of everyone else's convenience. Danielle felt it, recognized it, and decided not to accept it as the price of keeping peace. "I paid for this seat," she said, steady enough to rest the glass on, "and I intend to keep it." Now, a low rustle spread through the cabin, the polite kind of discomfort people pretend to ignore while secretly keeping score. A man 2 rows back cleared his throat and asked no one in particular if the weather in Los Angeles would cooperate with late arrivals. His companion murmured something sympathetic about connections. The plane had not moved, but time already felt like it was leaning on the cabin from the outside. Brian's smile became the kind used when the person has been trained to turn down the volume of a situation without touching the dial. "We absolutely respect that, Miss Brooks," he said. "Let me see if there is another comparable seat for Miss Miller." The words comparable and another did their delicate dance. Catherine's answering smile had edges. "Or," she said, "we could simply ask Miss Brooks to be flexible. You know how this works. Loyalty matters. We all want the flight to leave on time." The older couple across the aisle exchanged a look, the kind of glance shared by people who have had the same argument in different rooms over many years. The woman tilted her head, a small plea for patience that no one had asked her for. Danielle set her notebook aside and folded her hands in her lap. The leather cover had warmed to her touch. Susan tried again, drawing on a reservoir of phrases designed to glide through resistance. "Miss Brooks, sometimes a small adjustment from a single passenger can make everything easier for everyone. 2C is very similar, and you will still have first-class service. A gentle announcement hummed from the speakers at the galley. Pre-departure beverages would be collected in a few minutes. It sounded like a prayer for order. Danielle looked up at Susan, and the supervisor met eyes that were clear but not combative, steady but not immovable. Something in Susan's professional mask shifted, almost imperceptibly, the way a lake's surface notices a change in wind far away. She understood she was not speaking to indecision. Catherine filled the moment. "Do you even know who I am?" she said, not loudly, but with a practiced emphasis that made the aisle feel narrower. "I keep this route alive. I am in the system. People like me are the reason this cabin exists." "Fangman, I lost her." Brian took half a step closer to the boundary between helpful and intrusive. "Miss Miller," he said softly, "we'll take care of you." He meant it to soothe and to signal, and managed to do both, but not to everyone's satisfaction. Susan recalibrated, her tone now brisker, the way it becomes when a flight plan meets a headwind and the math must be redone without complaint. "Miss Miller, please take your assigned seat while we review options. Miss Brooks has the appropriate assignment for 1A today." The sentence had the finality of policy, the kind with legal muscle behind its tidy language. Catherine did not move. Her fingers drummed once on the headrest. Outside, the drizzle thinned into a delicate mist that made the tarmac look like glass. Danielle remembered a different glass, a boardroom wall of windows looking over an evening city where she had waited for a team to decide whether her competence outweighed their surprise. The memory arrived without bitterness. It brought only the clarity of something measured and confirmed. A passenger behind them sighed in the way of a person counting minutes in his head, reallocating them from dinner to traffic to sleep. He was not unkind, merely human. The cabin breathed in and held. Catherine leaned closer, and the perfume she wore, bright and expensive, made a small theater of the 2 feet between them. "Here's the thing," she said, the faux confiding tone at odds with the steel underneath. "There are cabins where people feel at home, and cabins where they don't. Maybe today, business class will feel more comfortable for you." The words arrived dressed in courtesy and carrying something else. Brian's eyes flicked to Susan, asking the question they had asked each other on long days before. "Can we persuade the problem to become smaller without pretending it does not exist?" Susan met his eyes and then returned to Catherine with the patience of a person walking a narrow ledge toward firmer ground. "Miss Miller," she said, "we cannot ask a passenger to leave a correctly assigned seat. Please allow me to confirm an alternative seat for you." Catherine gave a quick, tight laugh that did not contain joy. "Alternative," she repeated, as if the syllables were sour. "You know what happens when we reward inflexibility? Everyone pays. People like you," she added, and this time the smile dropped the last of its camouflage, "do not usually sit in 1A. The words did not shout. They did not need to. They carried the old architecture of an argument as old as gates and doors. The hum of the air system seemed to recede by a notch, as if the aircraft itself were listening. The older couple froze, hands still touching. A traveler in the second row turned very slightly, then stopped himself, a human reflex curbed by etiquette. Danielle felt the sentence do what sentences like that try to do: press a person back into place with the soft force of inevitability. She let it wash over her and then pass by. She thought of every week she had spent earning expertise the slow way, of every early morning flight and late night debrief, of every moment she had bitten back an explanation, because success is quieter when it is proved, not announced. She did not reach for a lecture or a memory or a list of receipts. She reached for the one thing that had carried her through rooms where welcome had to be made by hand: her own steady voice. Brian held still, understanding that some lines are not for flight attendants to answer. Susan's hands settled at her sides, fingers loose, as if a tight grip might give the wrong lesson. Catherine's chin lifted by a slight degree, a signal flare for allies who were not present. Danielle looks up slowly, eyes steady. "People like me? Care to explain?" The cabin falls silent. Silence moved across the rows like a careful tide, gathering what remained of the cabin's ease and setting it down farther away. Danielle Brooks kept her shoulders level, as if balance were a private pledge she refused to break. Catherine Miller's last remark still rang in the air, bright and thin, the way a glass sings when a finger traces its rim. Nearby passengers sat a touch straighter, and even the engine hush seemed to wait for someone to decide which way the moment would lean. Brian Carter returned from the galley with a practiced calm that could have been poured into a mold. At his side walked Susan Hall, her posture all economy and steadiness, the small notebook in her hand serving as both prop and promise. Her voice held the softness of professionalism, the kind designed to make difficult requests sound like favors gently offered. "Danielle, please, Just move for the sake of everyone else. The request drifted over the aisle like a warm towel and then cooled the instant it met its purpose. Catherine heard what she wanted to hear and gave it a quick polish. See? Even the crew agrees. She did not raise her volume. Yet the sentence expanded to fill the space, as if consent could be conjured by confidence alone. A man 2 rows back adjusted his watch band and murmured something about connections in Los Angeles. His companion answered with a sympathetic hum that carried the shape of worry without the words. Danielle steadied her hands on the armrests. Calm was not the same as surrender. She had learned the difference on mornings when she stood in front of teams and offered outcomes without theatrics. She turned to Susan with the same composure she used when a board member asked for a shortcut that did not exist. I understand everyone wants to leave on time, she said, her tone an even shoreline. I booked this seat weeks ago. I will stay in it. The sentence wore no armor. It did not need any. Susan's gaze did a brief, human thing flicker, and then recovered its training. She took a breath that looked like counting and adjusted the angle of her stance. Thank you for hearing me, she said quietly, and for staying respectful. The words acknowledged what the room might miss. That courtesy takes effort, especially when it is not returned. The aircraft door thudded with a finality that made the cabin feel suddenly more enclosed, like a bell jar sealed to protect a delicate arrangement. The jet bridge withdrew with a gentle shudder, and somewhere forward the latch slid into position with the clean sound of a mechanism obeying its design. The movement put time on the room's back. Departures do not wait patiently, and everyone knew it. When the cockpit door opened, it did so on the rhythm of procedure, not drama. Captain Richard Collins stepped into the aisle with the quiet authority of a man who had landed more flights than he could count and still treated each one as a separate promise. His uniform carried the easy polish of long habits, a tie that lay flat, stripes that meant more than decoration, a nameplate that announced nothing and assured everything. He nodded to Susan, then to Brian, then to the cabin, as if greeting a small town that expected both service and order. Good afternoon, he said, and the pitch of the air shifted, like an orchestra tuning toward a note it recognized. He listened to a brief account, not interrupting, not solving ahead of facts, and then inclined his head toward Danielle. Miss Brooks, he said, calm as a level horizon. I am advised that seat 1A is correctly assigned to you. The confirmation moved through the rows like a ripple catching sunlight. It should have closed the matter. It did not. The captain turned, acknowledging Catherine with the same measured courtesy. Miss Miller, he continued, we will do everything we can to accommodate you within policy. We are working to locate an alternative seat in first class. Catherine's smile reappeared, but it had become a thinner instrument. Captain, she said, sliding deference into her tone like a business card across the table, perhaps Miss Brooks could be flexible for the sake of the flight. A small adjustment would help everyone. I fool. The captain's eyes reflected years of weather, storms met, delays managed, promises kept as often as physics allowed. He balanced two truths the way a pilot balances fuel and distance. Flexibility is appreciated when it's voluntary, he said. We cannot require a passenger to leave a correctly assigned seat. The older couple across the aisle sat very still, hands touching the way long partnerships touch when the world asks them to endure other people's noise. Someone behind them whispered that boarding always finds a way to make strangers feel like a jury. The plane did not roll. Every minute became 2 minutes in the mind of anyone with a ride waiting, a table reserved, a bedtime to respect. Susan returned to the language of logistics. She spoke into her mic, requested a quick inventory, and listened with one ear to the quiet report from the gate. Brian managed the front row with the delicate grace of a person moving a candle through a draft. He offered water and received polite declines. People do not drink when they are counting minutes. Catherine edged closer to Danielle, not invading so much as announcing a claim on the space between them. The scent of her perfume arrived again, a bright thing in the room that had gone colorless with tension. Where I usually sit matters here, she said, and her smile suggested she had made a generous compromise by framing it as a consideration rather than a command. There are norms on this route. You might not be familiar with them. Danielle did not let the line rearrange the shape of her face. Familiarity, she knew, could be a velvet rope or a welcome mat, depending on who did the greeting. She looked at the captain, then back to Susan, and allowed silence to do a small measure of work. Silence, well chosen, can clarify where power actually sits. The captain weighed the room the way a pilot weighs a crosswind. No panic, only calculation. We need to push shortly, he said, speaking to everyone and to no one. Thank you for your patience while we resolve this within policy. The word within did its duty. reminding the cabin that rules guard the fairness everyone claims to want until desire knocks against them. Pressure, like altitude, changes what people say. A traveler in the second row leaned toward his seatmate and whispered that he did not care who sat where, he just wanted the wheels to move. Another quietly asked if a gate agent could step in. The murmur held no malice, only the impatience of ordinary lives that bend to timetables. Danielle heard it all and kept her breath even. The math was simple. She had paid for a seat, and the seat had her name on it. Susan tried one more time, the way a good professional grants a last chance before policy closes its hand. "Miss Brooks," she said, not unkindly, "we are minutes from pushback. If you were willing to move, we could avoid a delay. 2C is available. We would ensure you have the same service, and I would make a note for future consideration." The offer wore a new ribbon consideration, but carried the same old box. Danielle felt not anger, but fatigue bending inward. The familiar curve of a request that frames inconvenience as virtue when asked of the same people again and again. Yet she kept her tone warm enough to be unmistakably civil. "I hear you," she said, "and I am staying." And Catherine took that as an invitation to escalate. "This is exactly how flights get delayed," she said, not raising her voice, letting the sentence collect sympathy from anyone who preferred movement to conflict. "We all sacrifice a little so everyone gets where they're going." The captain did not flinch. "We do not sacrifice policy," he answered, and even his gentleness could not blunt the finality. "We apply it. Although for a moment, it seemed the room might fall back into order by mutual relief alone. Then a new pressure arrived, lighter but persistent, the small chorus of practical worries that turns into a push even when no one intends it. A passenger asked, "Are we leaving soon?" Another added, "I have a ride waiting curbside." The words were not aimed at Danielle, yet they landed where Catherine wanted them to land. The cabin's collective patience tilted almost imperceptibly toward the path of least resistance. Susan felt the tilt and corrected gently. She spoke into her mic again, listened, and gave a small nod that promised tidy options would appear if the world would simply pause. Brian, reading her cue, moved down the aisle to coordinate with the gate. Catherine's smile found fresh confidence in the shifting air. "You hear them," she said to Danielle, soft and pressed. "Sometimes we choose community over preference." Streetlights began to glow beyond the window as daylight thinned, each lamp a tiny coin laid along the edge of the runway. The cabin lights responded by dimming one notch, a signal that did not suit the present atmosphere. Danielle felt the nearness of a line she had crossed before in other rooms. That instant, when the task becomes an expectation, when someone else's comfort seeks rent from her dignity. She thought of the teams who trusted her to show up in Los Angeles and lead without apology. She thought of the interns who watched what she did on hard days to understand how to carry themselves on theirs. She thought of every woman who had messaged after a conference to say that watching her stand still had helped them stand still too. The thoughts did not harden her, they steadied her. The captain turned slightly as if to return to the cockpit, the way a man does when he has done what he can do and will now do what he must. Catherine shifted, ready to declare victory from momentum alone. The older couple remained a tableau of quiet, their silence like a candle cupped against the draft. Danielle did not raise her voice. She did not offer a rasum or a lesson. She chose a single act that was small enough to fit in a palm and large enough to change the room's center of gravity. Danielle exhales slowly, reaches for her phone, and whispers, "If they won't listen, I know someone who will." Ha! The breath Danielle had measured at the end of the last moment returned to her on command. A quiet thread she could follow out of the knot the cabin had become, and the promise she had made to herself, stay steady, stay fair, rose again like a shoreline she could trust. She did not look at Catherine or at the passengers counting minutes in their heads. She lowered her gaze to her phone, the screen a small island of light, and moved with the discretion of someone who understands that not every change of weather requires an announcement. The cabin remained sealed, light softened one notch for departure. Atlanta's late autumn evening pressed its glow along the windows. In that hush, which was only partly about courtesy and mostly about calculation, Danielle touched a single name and brought a familiar voice into the room without raising her own. "Anthony," she said. Calm as a level line, it's Danielle. "I'm on the Delta flight to Los Angeles, and we have a problem." Across from her, the older couple did not turn their heads, but they stilled in a way that registered attention without intrusion. Brian paused mid-gesture with a stack of napkins. Susan's eyes flicked toward the cockpit. Reading the clock she could feel in the captain's posture. Danielle continued, each word measured for duty and restraint. I'm not asking for a favor, she said. I am asking for policy to be observed. I am in seat 1A according to my boarding pass. I have been asked repeatedly to move for a Platinum Elite passenger. I have declined. The request has become insistent. She kept her tone warm enough to be human and cool enough to be useful. Anthony answered with the steadiness of someone who had walked more than a few runways of his own. I hear you, he said. Stay put. I will make the call. If anyone needs confirmation, give them my name. We will handle this correctly. Brian looked at Susan then, a small exchange that carried more words than he used. There's a grammar to cruise under pressure, and it lives in glances, not speeches. Danielle ended the call, set the phone face down, and folded her hands. She did not change her posture, and she did not search for witnesses. She had placed the right piece on the right square. There was nothing else to do that would not subtract from the act she had chosen. In the galley, a chime sounded, something small in the stream of tiny sounds that make air travel feel like a ritual rather than a test. The captain's door opened a few inches and closed, subtle as a heartbeat. From the aisle behind them came a quiet question from a traveler about arrival times and dinner reservations. It was answered by a promise that meant, in truth, we are trying. The announcement that followed did not name a cause. It was only named a pause. A gate agent's voice filtered through the cabin speakers with that polite distance airports cultivate, advised that departure would be briefly delayed at the captain's discretion. No reason offered, none required. The delay fell across the rows in a soft sheet. People adjusted their reactions according to temperament. A few shoulders sagged, a few chins sagged. The older man across the aisle patted the back of the older woman's hand. Catherine let out a breath that sounded like a verdict she had been waiting to deliver. This is what I meant, she said. Not quite to anyone, and entirely to everyone. Delays. Avoidable delays. All the fathermen too are every. Susan received the transmission in her left ear and straightened the way people do when a plane slides onto the rails. She thanked the unseen voice, then thanked it again, as if duplication might help the thank you survive the friction of the next few minutes. She glanced to Brian. Culprit is coming down, she said, in a murmur meant to reach one person and, inevitably, 8. The words traveled the aisle faster than she intended. The way heat travels along metal. Brian nodded once. A pilot light of composure relit. He stepped a pace forward, positioning himself between expectation and policy like a human bulkhead. Danielle kept still. Stillness, she knew, is not absence. It is presence without apology. She took a sip of water. The lemon had cooled, but its edge remained. The minutes passed with the slow certainty of a pendulum. Not cruel, not kind. The door opened. 2 corporate officers entered wearing dark suits that did not advertise authority so much as refuse to borrow it. One carried a tablet in a slim case. The other had an identification badge that swung against his jacket like a small metronome. Their faces belonged to people who do not look for cameras, only facts. They spoke first to Susan, then to Brian, with a compressed cadence of operational language. Verify, confirm, document, proceed. The supervisor reported calmly. Boarding pass checked. Assignment correct. Passenger asked to move. Passenger declined. Pressure escalated. Captain informed. The officers listened with their eyes as well as their ears, the better to weigh not just statements, but their weather. One officer stepped to Danielle's row and pitched his voice to a register that protected dignity rather than displayed it. Miss Brooks, he said, thank you for your patience. We will be reviewing the conduct of our staff on the spot. Do you need anything before we continue? Danielle answered with the same words she would have used in the boardroom when someone remembered to ask if she had water before asking for a decision. No, thank you. I'm fine. He nodded, the nod old-fashioned in his courtesy, and turned to Susan and Brian. The door to the galley closed behind the 4 of them with a soft seal. The pause that followed might as well have been a curtain. The cabin held its breath. Danielle did not lean. She did not strain to hear. None of them did. Not openly. But silence changes pressure the way altitude does, and the room felt it. A man in the second row shifted, then stilled himself as if he had been taught not to fidget in old churches. Outside, the tarmac lights made parallel strings of coins. Inside, time compressed to the small span between the hinge opening and the hinge closing. When the hinge turned again, it did so without ceremony. The galley door opened. Susan and Brian returned, composed but altered in that gentle, undeniable way people are after an outcome has been placed in their hands rather than argued about. The officers stepped out behind them, voices neutral and clear. Mr. Carter, one said, Miss Hall, thank you. Please gather your belongings. You are relieved of duty for the remainder of this flight pending review. The sentence did not rise to gloat or fall to scold. It lived exactly where policy lives, on the flat plane of consequence. Brian's eyes shut once and opened, the blink of a professional who has learned to receive news standing up. Susan inclined her head in acknowledgement, a quiet yes to authority that had learned its job properly today. She turned to the captain, who had joined them in the front row, and gave him the smallest nod a chain of command requires. He returned it, shoulder level, then faced the cabin with the same calm that had carried him through weather no one would ever hear about. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, we appreciate your patience. There will be a brief crew change. We will keep you informed. His tone made even the word brief sound like a promise the aircraft intended to keep. Catherine's expression hardened into the kind of certainty that believes it has been insulted by reality. She opened her palms as if displaying invisible evidence. This is absurd, she said. And at that moment, she could not prevent her voice from reaching a few rows farther than she meant. You are punishing the crew because one passenger refused to cooperate? The officer closest to her answered without adding heat. We are applying policy to conduct observations and confirm. Please take your assigned seat while we complete our review. The line did not invite debate. It parked the conversation curbside and set the brake. From the jet bridge, 2 replacement crew members approached, uniforms crisp, faces professional in that way that lets the cabin borrow a little steadiness from the people guiding it. They exchanged quiet handoffs with Susan and Brian, who yielded their places with dignity intact. The process held the efficiency of a drill practiced until it could be executed on a day when no one wanted practice. The older couple across the aisle looked down, not from shame, but from respect for the moment's scale. Small in the ledger of the world, not small to the people whose names would be typed into a report tonight. Danielle sat exactly as she had sat before the phone call. She did not adjust her scarf. She did not align her pen. She let the outcome take its place in the line of events, neither inflated nor minimized. The officer who had addressed her earlier stopped again by her seat and lowered his voice. Thank you, Miss Brooks, he said. We are not finished. If you need anything, ask. She met his eyes and gave a single nod that meant gratitude and also meant proceed. He understood both. The ripple of reaction that passed through the cabin then was quieter than the earlier ones. It carried relief, certainly, the practical kind that tallies minutes saved, but it also carried recognition, the quiet recognition people feel when the thing that should have been obvious is finally allowed to be obvious. A flight attendant collected a glass with hands that did not shake. The captain consulted his watch, conferred in low tones, and prepared to return to the cockpit. The evening outside remained the same, but it felt different because the room did. At the edge of that recalibration, the gate door opened again, and the 3rd corporate officer appeared with a printed document and a badge that identified his department in letters large enough to be read without squinting. He walked the last few steps with a discretion that suggested practice at delivering outcomes in complicated rooms. He paused by Catherine, checked the name on his page, and spoke in a tone that refused to take more space than his words needed. Miss Miller, he said, you have been documented by multiple witnesses as disrupting the cabin environment and pressuring another customer to vacate a correctly assigned seat. Your loyalty status will be reviewed. For tonight, you will be rebooked. Catherine lifted her chin, then rescued her poise with the same speed she had lost it. She began a sentence that promised to be both elegant and sharp, and the officer raised a single hand the width of a breath to show he would not interrupt if she wished to continue. She measured the gesture's meaning and chose not to speak. Her perfume traced one more bright arc in the air and then thinned. Every movement now seemed to seek its original choreography. The replacement attendants swept the cabin with quiet competence. The captain signaled the steps that lead to motion. The older couple relaxed their fingers. Danielle set her glass down with the care of someone returning a borrowed thing in better condition than she found it. She did not look for approval. She did not scan for allies. She allowed the cabin to belong to everyone again, which is what public spaces ask of dignity when dignity has been defended. Somewhere aft, a child's laugh flashed like a brief ribbon of color. The aircraft, which had felt like a courtroom for too long, remembered it was a vessel. Metal did not change his mind. People did. The gate agent's voice returned to confirm pushback pending final checks. The repairs to the room's balance felt complete enough to trust. Catherine frowns, her voice sharp. Wait, what's going on? Why are they here for her? The question Catherine had flung into the room did not land where she hoped. It floated, lost momentum, and faded into the hush a cabin keeps for decisions already set in motion. One of the corporate officers answered in a tone that refused spectacle. He identified himself to the captain, to the supervisor, and then to the front row, naming the policy that governs conduct when a passenger pressures another to vacate a correctly assigned seat. He did not add emphasis. He did not need to. The words themselves carried the weight of the work. The captain gave a small nod that meant proceed. He stood close enough to be present and far enough to let the process do its job. The replacement attendants waited with the respectful stillness of people walking into a room that remembers stress and prefers not to relive it. They had learned to read the air, and tonight the air asked for steady hands and quiet steps. The older couple across the aisle rested their joined fingers against the seam between their armrests, a private anchor in a public moment. Catherine tried to rearrange the facts the way a person smooths a wrinkle from a dress that has already creased. "I have status," she said, and the sentence came out smaller than she intended, like light through heavy cloth. The near officer met the words with a patient clarity. "Your status does not place you above policy, Miss Miller. You are being rebooked. Your conduct tonight will be reviewed." He offered no additional ornament. The restraint functioned as a kind of mercy. No gloating, no humiliation, only the line between behavior and consequence drawn with a steady hand. A gate agent approached with a new boarding pass and a soft phrase about a later departure and a complimentary meal at the terminal. It was the professional balm offered when a day needs its edges rounded. Catherine accepted the paper with precise fingers. For a heartbeat, she looked as if she might unspool an argument that would turn the room again. Instead, she closed her handbag with a neat click, lifted her chin, and stepped back. The perfume that had written bright loops through the air traced one last arc and then thinned until only the memory of it remained. The aisle cleared. The captain thanked the officers and returned to the work of departure. Susan and Brian, now relieved of duty, gathered their items with the practiced dignity of people who have been trained for long flights and longer days. Suspending them had not been dramatic in the telling. It did not need to be. It only needed to be clear. The replacement crew took their places as if they had always been meant for them, and the cabin showed its approval not with applause, but with breath returning to a normal pace. Danielle had not moved. Her water glass stood where she had left it, a single bead of condensation traveling in a patient path toward the coaster. She did not glance around to measure the eyes on her. She knew better than to seek comfort from strangers, when the greater comfort is knowing she had held her line without borrowing anyone else's voice. The officer who had addressed her before paused by her seat once more and lowered his tone to a register that belonged to private courtesies. "We appreciate your patience, Miss Brooks," he said. "If you wish to provide a formal statement, we will make that process easy." She nodded. "I will," she said. "Thank you." "Level." The speakers carried the captain's voice back into the room, a calm baritone that had landed more nights than this aircraft had flown. He acknowledged the brief delay, promised an efficient taxi, and thanked the passengers for their patience in neutral language that placed no blame and asked for no praise. He sounded like a chapter closing with the confidence that the next one had already been outlined. The cabin, grateful for the grammar of order, seemed to exhale. In the small quiet that followed, a young attendant collected a few empty glasses with the kind of care people reserve for fragile things when they have just watched something else break and be mended. A man in the second row sent a brief message to the person waiting to pick him up, a single sentence that said he would be a little late and not to worry. The older woman beside Daniel's aisle smiled without looking directly at anyone, a kindness that offered presence without claim. Courtesy, like weather, can spread by example when it is given a little time. Susan and Brian stepped onto the jet bridge accompanied by a gate agent, their faces composed in that particular way professionals carry themselves when the room has just learned something true about them and about itself. Their departure did not feel like theater. It felt like a necessary act in a system that works when it chooses to work for everyone. Danielle wished them fairness. She did not wish them pain. Justice, well done, does not require hunger for anyone's suffering. It requires a clean separation between cause and effect. The officers left with brief nods to the captain, and the door sealed behind them. The aircraft remembered its purpose. The captain called for final checks. The new lead attendant walked the aisle with a calm eye and a steady smile that said, "In essence, we have you." Danielle returned the smallest nod, the kind that answers without starting a conversation. Outside, the taxiway lights drew a path like coins laid carefully along a dark table. The city beyond the airport lifted its own constellations, windows, and street lamps, and the occasional flashing beacon blinking a measured reassurance into the night. Time, which had stretched and tightened, found a normal shape again. The minutes regained their regular size. Danielle let her shoulders release a fraction and drew a breath that returned not as relief, but as readiness. She felt the clean edge of what had been learned on this flight. That calm is not compliance, that policy can be a shelter when it refuses to bend around power, that a single voice, offered steadily, can invite a system to remember what it wrote down about itself. In the weeks that would follow, announcements would travel the quiet corridors of internal memos and the public lanes of press releases. There would be training sessions whose titles sounded mild and whose contents, if taken seriously, could change the shape of an ordinary day. Procedures would be rewritten, not to make headlines, but to keep ordinary hours from needing them. Some passengers would not notice the adjustments at all. Others would notice in the way a person notices. No one asks them to trade dignity for convenience anymore. Danielle did not need to own those outcomes. It was enough to know that, tonight, the room had been reminded what fairness looks like when it stands up and stays standing. The captain's voice returned once more, lean and clear, prepare for pushback. The aircraft gave a small shiver as the tog's harness found its purchase. The new attendant checked belts and latches and gave one last practiced smile to the front row. Danielle felt the smallest lift inside her. Not triumph, not relief, but the quiet steadiness a person earns when she chooses the precise act that lets the room set itself right. She reached for the notebook and considered one clean page, a place to write 2 lines for the meeting ahead. Begin with outcomes, end with respect. The pen set ready. Her hands, finally still, knew the posture of work and of rest. The jet bridge withdrew. The world outside their windows shifted from terminal to taxiway, from waiting to motion. Danielle opens her laptop again, calm and steady, as the plane finally begins taxiing. Outside the window, the night sky waits. In the quiet after the storm, the cabin settled into motion once more. And what lingered was not the argument, but the stillness of a woman who had chosen dignity over compliance. The night sky outside the windows carried them forward, while inside, passengers reflected on what they had witnessed, how a calm voice could reveal truths that power often tries to conceal. From this moment comes a lesson many already know in their bones, that fairness is not a gift, but a right, and that standing firm for what is just can shift the course of more than a single evening. It reminds us that life's true strength is not found in status or title, but in the quiet resolve to hold one's place with grace. Like the steady flame in a window on a winter night, such resolve can guide weary travelers home, even through shadows of prejudice and fear. And as you think of your own journey, may you find the courage to honor that same light, then pass it gently along to someone still searching for their way.